The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace gardens as Elizabeth stepped onto the marble balcony, her silk dress flowing gently in the autumn breeze. Below, thousands of people had gathered, their faces turned upward with a mixture of hope and desperation. She could hear their whispers, their prayers, their quiet sobs. They knew, just as she did, that this might be the last time they would see their beloved princess. Elizabeth's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the cold stone railing. Behind her, through the glass doors, she could see Alexander pacing back and forth in their private chambers. His usually perfect appearance was disheveled, his royal uniform wrinkled from another sleepless night. Dark circles under his eyes told the story of weeks spent by her bedside, holding her hand through countless medical procedures, whispering words of encouragement even when the doctors had given up hope. The diagnosis had come like thunder on a clear day. Stage 4 cancer, they said. Aggressive. Inoperable. The words had echoed through the palace corridors like a death sentence, reaching every corner of the kingdom within hours. Elizabeth, the people's princess, the woman who had dedicated her life to charity, to helping children in need, to bringing hope to the hopeless, was dying. She remembered the moment perfectly. Dr. Harrison had sat across from them in his sterile office, his kind eyes filled with sorrow as he delivered the news. Alexander had immediately reached for her hand, squeezing it so tightly she thought he might break her fingers. But she needed that anchor, that connection to something real and solid as her world crumbled around her. How long? Alexander had asked, his voice barely above a whisper. 6 months, the doctor replied. Maybe less. That had been 5 months and 3 weeks ago. Elizabeth closed her eyes and let the morning air fill her lungs. Each breath was precious now, each moment a gift she had learned not to take for granted. The chemotherapy had stolen her beautiful auburn hair, and the medications had made her skin pale and fragile, but her spirit remained unbroken. If anything, facing death had made her more determined to use every remaining day for something meaningful. The sound of footsteps behind her made her turn. Alexander appeared in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the warm light from their bedroom. Even now, after 12 years of marriage, her heart still skipped a beat when she looked at him. His dark hair was streaked with premature gray, courtesy of the stress of the past months, but his blue eyes still held that same intensity that had captured her heart when they first met at the university charity gala. The press is gathering, he said softly, stepping beside her on the balcony. They want a statement. Elizabeth nodded. She had been expecting this. The palace had managed to keep the worst of her condition private for months, but recently she had grown too weak to maintain her public appearances. The people were starting to ask questions, and they deserved answers. They deserved the truth. What will you tell them? She asked. Alexander was quiet for a long moment. His jaw clenched as he stared out at the crowd below. I'll tell them that you're the strongest person I've ever known, that you're fighting with everything you have, that their love and support means the world to us. But not the truth about the prognosis. Not yet. His voice broke slightly. I'm not ready for that. Elizabeth reached over and took his hand in hers. His skin was warm and familiar, calloused from years of polo and horseback riding. She traced the lines on his palm with her finger, memorizing every detail. These hands had held her on their wedding day, had comforted her through the miscarriages, had dried her tears when she thought she might never be able to give him the children they both desperately wanted. These hands had been her sanctuary. Alexander, she said gently, we need to start preparing people. The kingdom needs to know what's coming. He turned to face her, and she could see the tears he was fighting to hold back. I know, he whispered. I can't imagine a world without you in it. Below them, the crowd had grown larger. News crews were setting up their cameras, reporters checking their microphones. Elizabeth could see the worry etched on every face in the sea of people. These were her people, the citizens she had sworn to serve and protect. They had supported her through scandals and triumphs, had celebrated her victories and mourned her losses. They deserved better than false hope. There's something I want to do, she said suddenly. Before I can't anymore. Alexander looked at her with concern. What is it? I want to visit the children's hospital. One last time. I want to see the new wing we funded, meet the families, let the children know that their princess hasn't forgotten them. Elizabeth, you're barely strong enough to stand for more than a few minutes. The doctors said a lot of things. She smiled weakly. But those children are fighting battles much harder than mine. They need to know that even when things seem impossible, you keep fighting. You keep hoping. You keep loving. Alexander studied her face, seeing the determination that had made him fall in love with her all those years ago. Even facing death, she was thinking of others. It was quintessentially Elizabeth, selfless to the very end. "If you're sure you're strong enough," he said finally, "I'll find the strength." She squeezed his hand. "I always do when it comes to those children." As if sensing the importance of the moment, the crowd below had grown quiet. They stood in respectful silence, waiting. Elizabeth knew they could see her up there on the balcony, and she knew they were looking for signs, signs of how she was feeling, signs of hope, signs of what was to come. She lifted her free hand and waved gently to the crowd. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Cheers erupted from thousands of throats, applause thundered across the palace grounds, and she could see people wiping tears from their eyes. Signs appeared above the crowd. "We love you, Princess Elizabeth. Stay strong. Our hearts are with you." The outpouring of love was so intense it nearly knocked her off her feet. Alexander steadied her with his arm around her waist, and together they stood there, taking in the massive display of affection from their people. "They love you so much," Alexander murmured in her ear. "They love us," she corrected. "They love what we represent together. Hope, love, the belief that good can triumph over evil, that kindness matters, that everyone deserves dignity and respect." As they watched, more people continued to arrive. Families with children, elderly couples holding hands, young people with flowers, and homemade signs. The gathering was becoming something unprecedented, a spontaneous outpouring of national emotion the likes of which hadn't been seen in generations. Elizabeth felt a familiar tightness in her chest, a reminder that her body was failing her. But she pushed the discomfort aside. This moment was too important, too beautiful to be overshadowed by her illness. "I should go inside," she said reluctantly. "Rest before the hospital visit." Alexander nodded, but neither of them moved. They stood there together, watching their people, absorbing their love, storing up these precious moments for the difficult days that lay ahead. In the distance, church bells began to ring, calling people to prayer. Elizabeth closed her eyes and listened to the familiar sound that had marked so many important moments in her life. Her wedding, the births of her children, national celebrations, and times of mourning. Soon, those bells would toll for her. But not today. Today, she still had work to do, love to give, and hope to share. Today, she was still their princess, and she would honor that role until her very last breath. The black sedan moved slowly through the streets of the capital, its tinted windows protecting Elizabeth from the prying eyes of photographers while still allowing her to see the remarkable sight outside. Word of her hospital visit had somehow leaked, and thousands of people lined the streets, holding flowers, candles, and photographs of her from happier times. Elizabeth pressed her pale hand against the cool glass, watching the faces of her people as they passed. An elderly woman in a wheelchair held up a sign that read, "Thank you for everything." A group of school children had painted a banner with rainbow colors that said, "Get well soon, Princess." Grown men stood with tears streaming down their faces, removing their hats as the royal car passed by. "It's remarkable," whispered Sarah, Elizabeth's longtime lady-in-waiting, who sat beside her. Sarah had been with her since the beginning, through every triumph and tragedy, and now she was here for what they both knew might be the end. Alexander sat on Elizabeth's other side, his hand never leaving hers. He had insisted on coming despite the security risks, despite the media attention, despite the emotional toll it would take on both of them. Where Elizabeth went, he went. It had always been that way. "The hospital called," he said quietly. "There are over 300 families waiting to see you. Children who've been following your story, parents who've drawn strength from your courage." Dr. Matthews said some of the terminal patients have been holding on just for this visit. Elizabeth's heart clenched. She understood that feeling all too well, the desperate need to see something through, to reach one more milestone, to have one more meaningful moment before letting go. She had been doing the same thing for months, pushing through the pain and exhaustion because there was still so much love to give. The car turned a corner, and St. Mary's Children's Hospital came into view. Elizabeth gasped at what she saw. The entire building was surrounded by people, not just the families and hospital staff, but hundreds of supporters who had come just to be near her, to show their love and respect. Balloons in the royal colors floated above the crowd, and someone had organized a choir of children who were singing her favorite hymn, Amazing Grace. "Your Highness," said James, the head of her security detail, "we can take you in through the back entrance if this is too overwhelming." Elizabeth shook her head firmly. No, I want to see them. They've come here for me. The least I can do is acknowledge them properly. As the car pulled up to the main entrance, the crowd pressed closer, but in an orderly, respectful way. These weren't paparazzi or thrill seekers. These were people who genuinely cared about her, who had been touched by her life and work, who wanted to show their gratitude and support in what might be their last opportunity. Alexander stepped out of the car first, then turned to help Elizabeth. She had dressed carefully for this visit, choosing a soft blue dress that had always been flattering and adding a silk scarf to cover her head where her hair had once been. She moved slowly, conserving her strength, but she held her head high with the dignity that had become her trademark. The moment she appeared, a hush fell over the crowd. Then, as if by some invisible signal, everyone began to applaud. It started softly, respectfully, but grew into a thunderous ovation that seemed to echo off every building in the vicinity. Elizabeth felt tears spring to her eyes at the overwhelming display of love. She walked slowly along the rope line, stopping to shake hands, accept flowers, and exchange a few words with as many people as possible. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, thrust a handmade card toward her. "I drew this for you, princess," the child said in a sweet, lisping voice. "It's you and me, and we're both getting better." Elizabeth knelt down carefully, bringing herself to the child's eye level. The drawing showed 2 stick figures holding hands under a rainbow, both wearing crowns and smiling. "It's beautiful, darling. What's your name?" "Emma. I have leukemia, but Mommy says if I'm brave like you, I'll get better." Elizabeth felt her heart break and heal simultaneously. She looked into Emma's bright eyes and saw the same courage she had been trying to summon in herself. "You know what, Emma? I think your mommy is absolutely right. We have to be brave for each other, don't we?" The little girl nodded solemnly and threw her arms around Elizabeth's neck. For a moment, they held each other, 2 fighters in different battles, but sharing the same war against fear and despair. When Elizabeth finally stood up, she had to lean on Alexander for support. The brief interaction had drained more of her energy than she had expected, but it had also filled her with something precious, purpose. Inside the hospital, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. The new pediatric wing that Elizabeth had helped fund was a marvel of modern medicine and design, with bright murals on the walls, natural light streaming through large windows, and play areas that made the space feel more like a community center than a medical facility. Dr. Matthews, the head of pediatric oncology, greeted them at the entrance. He was a kind man in his 50s who had worked tirelessly alongside Elizabeth to make this new wing a reality. "Your Highness, I can't tell you what this means to our families. Some of these children have been asking about you every day." Elizabeth smiled. "Then, let's not keep them waiting." The first room they visited held a 12-year-old boy named Michael who had been battling bone cancer for 2 years. He was thin and pale, but his eyes lit up when he saw Elizabeth enter. "Princess Elizabeth, I can't believe you're really here." She sat on the edge of his bed, careful not to disturb the various tubes and monitors surrounding him. "I couldn't let you fight this battle without coming to see you. You're one of my heroes, you know." "Me? But you're the princess. And you're a warrior," she replied. "Do you know how much strength it takes to go through what you're going through? I'm learning about that kind of strength myself these days." They talked for several minutes about his treatment, his dreams of becoming a pilot, and his beloved dog who waited for him at home. When it was time to leave, Michael grabbed her hand. "Princess," he said seriously, "I heard you're sick too. Can I tell you something that helps me when I'm scared?" Elizabeth nodded, leaning closer. "I pretend that all the people who love me are sending me their strength through invisible threads, like we're all connected. So I'm never really alone, and I'm never really just fighting with my own strength. I have everybody's." The wisdom of this young boy hit Elizabeth like a physical blow. She realized that this was exactly what she had been feeling from the crowds outside, from Alexander's unwavering presence, from all the letters and flowers that arrived at the palace daily. She wasn't fighting alone. She was carrying the love and strength of thousands of people. "Michael," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "that's the most beautiful thing anyone has ever said to me." As they moved through the wing, visiting room after room, Elizabeth was struck again and again by the resilience of these children. There was Sophie, age 8, who had painted a portrait of Elizabeth and insisted on giving it to her. There was David, 16, who had written a song about hope and performed it on his guitar despite being barely strong enough to hold the instrument. There was baby James, only 2 years old, who fell asleep in Elizabeth's arms as she rocked him gently. Each interaction took a toll on her physical strength, but added immeasurably to her spiritual reserves. These children were teaching her something profound about how to face the unfaceable, how to find joy in the midst of suffering, how to hold on to hope even when the future seemed uncertain. Alexander watched his wife throughout the visit, marveling at her grace under the most difficult circumstances imaginable. Even as her body betrayed her, her heart remained wholly committed to these children and their families. He saw her slip extra money to a mother who mentioned struggling to pay for parking, saw her promise to have palace staff follow up on a particular case, saw her use her influence to arrange for special treatments that might otherwise be unavailable. As they prepared to leave, the hospital staff had arranged one final surprise. All the children who were well enough had gathered in the main playroom, along with their families, for a farewell ceremony. They had prepared songs and poems, drawings, and crafts, all expressing their love and gratitude. But it was the final presentation that broke everyone's heart. Little Emma, the 6-year-old from outside, had somehow made it into the hospital and up to the playroom. She stepped forward with a small wrapped box. "This is from all of us," she announced in her clear, sweet voice. "We wanted to give you something to remember us by." Inside the box was a simple silver locket. When Elizabeth opened it, she found dozens of tiny photographs, pictures of every child in the ward, arranged in a beautiful mosaic pattern. "Now you can carry us all with you," Emma explained. "Just like Michael said about the invisible threads. We'll always be connected." Elizabeth could no longer hold back her tears. She knelt down and hugged Emma, then opened her arms to include as many children as could reach her. Alexander stepped forward and joined the group embrace, and soon all the adults in the room were crying. Nurses, doctors, parents, and security guards, all moved by this incredible display of love and mutual support. When they finally left the hospital, the crowd outside had grown even larger. But now Elizabeth felt different. She was still dying, still facing an uncertain and frightening future, but she was no longer afraid of being alone. She carried with her the love of these children, their families, and thousands of people who had shown up simply to support her. As their car pulled away, Elizabeth looked back at the hospital one more time. She knew she would probably never see it again, never hold those brave children in her arms again. But she also knew that the love exchanged in those rooms would last forever, connecting them all through invisible threads that not even death could break. 3 weeks after the hospital visit, Elizabeth woke to find Alexander sitting in the chair beside their bed, fully dressed in his morning suit, staring out the window at the dawn breaking over the palace gardens. She had been sleeping more and more lately, her body demanding rest as it fought a battle it could not win. But her mind remained sharp, and she immediately sensed that something was different about this morning. "What is it?" she asked softly, her voice hoarse from sleep and medication. Alexander turned to her, and she could see the weight of the world in his eyes. "Dr. Harrison wants to see us this morning. He says there are things we need to discuss." Elizabeth nodded, understanding immediately. They both knew what this meeting would bring, the conversation they had been dreading but could no longer postpone. The final timeline, the last arrangements, the beginning of the end. She struggled to sit up, and Alexander immediately moved to help her, adjusting her pillows and bringing her the silk robe she loved. His movements were gentle but practiced now. Over the past months, he had become expert at reading her needs, anticipating her discomfort, providing comfort in countless small ways. "Has the palace released any statements about yesterday?" she asked. Yesterday had been difficult. Elizabeth had attempted to attend a small reception for visiting diplomats, but had collapsed during the receiving line. The incident had been kept as quiet as possible, but she knew that rumors were already spreading throughout the capital and beyond. "James handled it," Alexander said carefully. "He told the press that you were feeling under the weather and had retired early. But, darling," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "people are starting to ask more direct questions. The speculation is becoming difficult to manage." Elizabeth understood. The palace had done an admirable job protecting her privacy and dignity throughout her illness, but there came a point when the truth could no longer be hidden. Perhaps that point was now. An hour later, they sat in Dr. Harrison's office, the same sterile room where their world had first been shattered 6 months ago. The oncologist looked older now, Elizabeth thought, as though treating her had aged him as much as it had aged her. "I want to be completely honest with you both," Dr. Harrison began, his kind eyes filled with sorrow. The latest scans show that the cancer has spread more aggressively than we had hoped. The treatments are no longer having any meaningful effect. Alexander's hand found hers and gripped it tightly. She could feel him trembling slightly, though his face remained composed. How long? Elizabeth asked, her voice steady despite the fear rising in her chest. Days. Perhaps a week or two if you're very lucky. I'm sorry, Your Highness. I wish I had better news. The silence that followed was deafening. Elizabeth had known this moment would come, had been preparing for it intellectually, but the reality of hearing the words spoken aloud hit her like a physical blow. What about pain management? Alexander asked, his voice tight with control. We can keep her comfortable, Dr. Harrison assured them. She shouldn't suffer. There are medications, procedures we can do to ensure that her final days are as peaceful as possible. Elizabeth found her voice again. I want to go home. To the palace. I want to spend whatever time I have left in my own bed, surrounded by the people and things I love. Dr. Harrison nodded. We can absolutely arrange for home hospice care. I'll coordinate with the palace medical team to ensure you have everything you need. As they left the hospital, Elizabeth felt a strange sense of relief mixed with her terror. The uncertainty was over. The timeline was clear. Now she could focus on what truly mattered, saying goodbye to the people she loved, ensuring that Alexander would be all right without her, and making peace with the life she had lived. Back at the palace, Elizabeth asked Alexander to call together their closest staff and advisors. It was time to tell them the truth. They gathered in the private sitting room that had been the scene of so many important family meetings over the years. Sarah, her lady-in-waiting, James, her private secretary, Dr. Matthews from the Children's Hospital, Father Michael, their chaplain, and several others who had become like family. Elizabeth sat in her favorite chair, the afternoon light streaming through the tall windows behind her, giving her an almost ethereal appearance. Alexander stood beside her, one hand on her shoulder, providing strength and support. My dear friends, she began, her voice calm and clear despite the devastating news she was about to share. I wanted you to hear this from me personally before it becomes public knowledge. Dr. Harrison has informed us that I have only a short time left, perhaps days, certainly no more than a few weeks. The reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. Sarah burst into tears, while Dr. Matthews bowed his head in grief. James, ever the professional, immediately began thinking about logistics, but his eyes were bright with unshed tears. I want you all to know, Elizabeth continued, that these past months, difficult as they have been, have also been some of the most meaningful of my life. Your love, your support, your dedication have meant everything to me. You've helped me face this with dignity, and for that, I will be forever grateful. Father Michael stepped forward. Your Highness, we should discuss your wishes for the service. The arrangements. Elizabeth nodded. She had been thinking about this for weeks. I want something that celebrates life, not mourns death. I want the children from the hospital to sing, those who are well enough. I want flowers from our gardens, not expensive arrangements. And I want the doors of the cathedral open to anyone who wants to come. This isn't just about saying goodbye to a princess. It's about saying goodbye to someone who tried to make a difference. Over the next few hours, they discussed the practical details that death requires, the succession plans, the media strategy, the ceremonial protocols. But Elizabeth found herself most concerned with the personal elements. She wanted to write letters to the children at the hospital, to record video messages for Alexander to watch on future birthdays and anniversaries, to ensure that her favorite charities would continue to receive support. As evening approached and the staff dispersed to begin their various preparations, Elizabeth found herself alone with Alexander in their private chambers. The weight of what lay ahead pressed down on both of them like a physical force. I'm not ready, Alexander said suddenly, his composure finally cracking. I know I'm supposed to be strong for you, for the kingdom, but Elizabeth, I'm not ready to do this without you. She moved carefully to the sofa where he sat and took his hands in hers. My darling, you're the strongest man I've ever known. You've been carrying both of us for months. When I'm gone, you'll find reserves of strength you didn't even know you had. But how do I live in a world that doesn't have you in it? The question was torn from somewhere deep in his soul. Elizabeth felt her own tears begin to fall. You live by remembering everything we built together. You live by continuing the work we started. You live by loving as deeply as you can for as long as you can. That's what I need from you. I need you to keep living, really living, not just existing. They held each other then, crying together for the future they would never have, for the growing old together they had been denied, for the quiet moments and shared laughter that would soon be just memories. Later that night, unable to sleep, Elizabeth walked slowly through the palace halls. She wanted to imprint every detail in her memory. The portraits of previous royals who had faced their own trials, the tapestries that told the story of their nation's history, the windows that looked out over the city she had served for so many years. In the nursery wing, she stopped at the room that had been prepared for the children she and Alexander had never been able to have. The miscarriages had been devastating, but they had found other ways to nurture and love. Through their work with children's charities, through mentoring young people, through being aunt and uncle figures to dozens of children who needed extra care and attention. She thought about little Emma and Michael and all the other children she had met at the hospital. In a way, they had become her children too, and knowing that her legacy would live on through their courage and strength gave her comfort. As she made her way back to her bedroom, Elizabeth realized that she was no longer afraid of dying. She was afraid of leaving Alexander alone, afraid of disappointing the people who had believed in her, afraid that her death would cause unnecessary pain to those she loved. But death itself no longer terrified her. She had lived a life full of love and purpose. She had made a difference, however small, in the lives of others. She had experienced a marriage that was a true partnership, built on respect and devotion and shared dreams. She had known the joy of serving something larger than herself. Most importantly, she had learned what little Michael had tried to teach her, that we are all connected by invisible threads of love, and those connections transcend even death. She would live on in Alexander's heart, in the memories of the children she had helped, in the lives she had touched, and the changes she had made. As she slipped back into bed beside her sleeping husband, Elizabeth felt a deep peace settle over her. Tomorrow would bring more difficult conversations, more tears, more goodbyes. But tonight, she was home, surrounded by love, ready to face whatever came next with the grace and dignity that had defined her entire life. The moonlight streamed through their bedroom window, illuminating the silver locket around her neck, the one filled with photos of the children from the hospital. Her own invisible thread to the courage and hope that would carry her through her final days. The announcement came at dawn on a Tuesday morning, delivered with the solemn dignity that such news demanded. James, Elizabeth's private secretary, stood before the gathered press corps in the palace briefing room, his usually steady voice wavering slightly as he read the carefully prepared statement. It is with profound sadness that we announce that Her Royal Highness Princess Elizabeth is in the final stages of her battle with cancer. After consultation with her medical team, Her Highness has decided to spend her remaining time at home, surrounded by her family and loved ones. She wishes to thank the people for their continued prayers and support during this difficult time. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, as the full impact of the words sank in, the questions began, shouted inquiries about timelines, about arrangements, about the kingdom's future. But James had already turned and walked away, leaving the press to grapple with the reality that their beloved princess was dying. Within hours, the news had spread around the world. Television programming was interrupted, websites crashed from traffic, and social media filled with tributes, memories, and messages of love. World leaders issued statements, celebrities shared personal encounters with Elizabeth, and ordinary people began gathering outside the palace gates in unprecedented numbers. Inside the palace, Elizabeth was both heartbroken and moved by the outpouring of love. Alexander had set up a laptop in their bedroom so she could see the tributes pouring in from around the globe. There were videos from the children at the hospital, singing songs they had written for her. There were messages from world leaders, from Nobel Prize winners, from people whose lives had been touched by her charity work. But perhaps most meaningful were the simple posts from ordinary people, mothers who named their daughters after her, teachers who used her example to inspire their students, young people who had chosen careers in social work because of her influence. She had never fully understood the impact of her life until now, when she was losing it. "Look at this," Alexander said, showing her his phone. A hashtag had begun trending worldwide. Hashtag Thank You Elizabeth. Millions of people were sharing stories of how she had influenced their lives, photos from her various charitable visits, quotes from her speeches that had inspired them during difficult times. Elizabeth smiled weakly. "I had no idea so many people were paying attention. You changed the world, darling. One heart at a time." Dr. Harrison arrived that afternoon with a small team of hospice nurses who would help make Elizabeth's final days as comfortable as possible. The palace medical suite had been transformed into a peaceful haven, filled with flowers from well-wishers around the world, soft music, and all the comforts of home. "How are you feeling today?" Dr. Harrison asked as he checked her vital signs. "Tired," Elizabeth admitted, "but also strangely peaceful." "Is that normal?" "Very normal," he assured her. Many patients report a sense of acceptance, even tranquility, in their final days. Your body is preparing for what comes next, and sometimes that brings its own kind of grace. Throughout the day, visitors came and went. Sarah brought fresh flowers from the palace gardens and helped Elizabeth write thank you notes to some of the organizations that had sent especially meaningful tributes. Father Michael came to pray with her and discuss her thoughts about what lay beyond this life. Her elderly Aunt Margaret made the journey from Scotland to say goodbye, bringing with her photo albums from Elizabeth's childhood that sparked hours of sweet reminiscence. But it was the unexpected visitor that evening who moved Elizabeth most deeply. Little Emma, the 6-year-old from the hospital, appeared at the palace gates with her mother, asking if she could see the princess one more time. Despite the strict security protocols and the late hour, Alexander personally went down to invite them in. Emma entered the bedroom carrying a small potted plant, a tiny rose bush that she had been growing in the hospital's garden therapy program. "I wanted to give you something that would keep growing," she explained seriously. "So you'll always be getting new flowers, even when you can't plant any more yourself." Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears as she accepted the small gift. "Emma, this is the most beautiful present anyone has ever given me. But I want you to take it back with you and keep it growing. Every time it blooms, you can think of me, and I'll be thinking of you too, wherever I am." The little girl's face brightened. "Like the invisible threads Michael talked about." "Exactly like the invisible threads." Emma climbed carefully onto the bed and curled up next to Elizabeth, the same way she had during their first meeting at the hospital. "Princess, are you scared?" Elizabeth considered the question seriously. "A little bit," she admitted. "Not of dying, really, but of leaving the people I love." "What about you? Are you scared about your treatments?" "Sometimes. But then, I remember that being scared doesn't mean being weak. My mommy says brave people feel scared too. They just don't let the scared feeling stop them from doing what they need to do." Once again, Elizabeth was amazed by the wisdom of children. "Your mommy is absolutely right. And you, my dear Emma, are one of the bravest people I know." They talked for another hour about flowers and dreams, about favorite colors and silly jokes, about all the wonderful, ordinary things that make life beautiful. When it was time for Emma to leave, she hugged Elizabeth tightly. "I love you, princess," she whispered. "I love you too, sweetheart. More than you'll ever know." After Emma and her mother left, Alexander helped Elizabeth get ready for bed. These intimate moments had become precious to them both. The gentle routine of brushing her teeth, helping her into her nightgown, settling her comfortably among the pillows. They were small acts of love that spoke louder than grand gestures. "How many people do you think are outside?" Elizabeth asked, referring to the crowds that had been growing larger each day. Alexander looked out the window. "Thousands. They've been bringing flowers, candles, photos. Some have been sleeping out there, just to be close. The police estimate there might be 10,000 people by morning. They should go home to their families," Elizabeth said softly. "They shouldn't waste their time sitting vigil for me." "They're not wasting their time," Alexander replied. "They're honoring someone who dedicated her life to others. They're processing their own grief and finding comfort in community. In its own way, it's beautiful." Elizabeth nodded, though she still felt overwhelmed by the attention. She had always been a private person, despite her public role, and the idea of her death becoming a global event felt surreal. "Alexander," she said as he settled into bed beside her, "I need you to promise me something. Anything. After I'm gone, don't retreat from the world. Don't let grief turn you into a hermit. The kingdom needs you, and, more importantly, you need to keep living. Promise me you'll find ways to be happy again." Alexander was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know how to be happy without you. You'll learn. It won't be the same kind of happiness, but it will be real, and I'll be cheering you on from wherever I am." As they lay together in the darkness, Elizabeth felt a profound gratitude wash over her. Gratitude for this man who had loved her so completely, for the children who had taught her about courage, for a life that had been full of purpose and meaning. She was leaving the world better than she had found it, and that was all anyone could ask for. Outside, the crowds continued to grow. Candles flickered in the darkness as people prayed, sang, and shared stories about their princess. The invisible threads that connected them all to Elizabeth grew stronger as the night wore on, weaving a tapestry of love that would endure long after she was gone. In the morning, Elizabeth woke to find the sun streaming through her windows, and Alexander watching her with infinite tenderness. She knew, somehow, that this would be one of her last conscious days. Her body was shutting down, but her spirit felt more alive than ever, buoyed by love and ready for whatever came next. "Good morning, my darling," she whispered. "Good morning, beautiful," he replied, kissing her forehead gently. And, for one more precious day, they had each other. The morning came gently, with soft autumn light filtering through the bedroom curtains. Elizabeth woke slowly, aware that something fundamental had changed during the night. Her breathing was more labored, her body weaker, but her mind felt crystal clear, as if all the fog of medication and illness had lifted to allow her these final precious hours of consciousness. Alexander was already awake, sitting in the chair beside her bed, fully dressed but looking as though he hadn't slept at all. His eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion and grief, but when he saw her looking at him, he managed a smile of heartbreaking tenderness. "How are you feeling, my love?" he asked, taking her hand in both of his. "Ready," she said simply, and they both understood what she meant. Dr. Harrison had been sleeping in a guest room down the hall, and Sarah appeared within minutes of Elizabeth's waking, as if she possessed some intuitive knowledge that today would be different. The small team of people who had become Elizabeth's closest companions during these final weeks gathered quietly in the sitting room adjacent to the bedroom, ready to provide whatever comfort and assistance might be needed. "I want to see the sunrise," Elizabeth said, and Alexander immediately began arranging pillows so she could sit up properly and look out the large windows that faced east over the palace gardens. Together, they watched the sun climb slowly over the city she had served for 12 years. The light was golden and warm, painting everything with a beauty that seemed almost otherworldly. In the distance, she could see the spires of the cathedral where her funeral would soon be held, and, beyond that, the children's hospital where her heart had found so much purpose. "Tell me what you see out there," she said softly. Alexander looked out at the view they had shared so many mornings. "I see the gardens where we had our first private conversation after our engagement. I see the fountain where you used to sit and read when you needed to think. I see the path we walked every morning during those first happy years, before the responsibilities got so heavy. And I see the future," Elizabeth added. "I see children playing in those gardens someday, maybe our nieces and nephews, maybe the children from the hospital when they're well enough to visit. I see you walking those paths again, maybe not tomorrow or next year, but someday, and finding peace in the beauty we've been so blessed to call home." A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah entered carrying a silver tray with tea and toast, the same simple breakfast Elizabeth had preferred for years. But, more importantly, she carried news. "Your Highness," Sarah said gently, "there are people here to see you. The children from the hospital have come with their families. They're asking if they might be allowed to say goodbye." Elizabeth's heart swelled. "Of course. Please, bring them up. As many as can fit comfortably." Within minutes, the bedroom was filled with the soft chatter of children's voices. Little Emma appeared first, followed by Michael, Sophie, David, and nearly a dozen other young patients from the pediatric cancer ward. Some were in wheelchairs, others walked with careful steps, but all of them glowed with an inner light that Elizabeth had come to recognize as the special grace that comes from fighting hard battles. "We wanted to thank you," said Michael, now 13 and looking older than his years. "Not just for visiting us, but for showing us how to be brave." Elizabeth felt tears streaming down her face. "Oh, my darlings, you have it backwards. You taught me about courage. Every single day you face things that would terrify grown adults, and you do it with such grace, such hope. You are my heroes." Emma climbed carefully onto the bed, just as she had so many times before. "Princess, we wrote something for you. A song. Can we sing it?" Elizabeth nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. What followed was the most beautiful music she had ever heard. The children's voices, some strong and clear, others weakened by treatment, but full of determination, rose together in a simple melody they had composed themselves. The words spoke of love conquering fear, of light shining in darkness, of invisible threads connecting all hearts forever. When the song ended, the room was completely silent except for the quiet sounds of adults trying not to sob. Elizabeth looked around at these amazing children and their families, and felt a peace deeper than anything she had ever experienced. "Thank you," she whispered. "That was perfect." One by one, the children came forward to hug her, to whisper their own private words of goodbye, to leave small gifts and drawings they had made. When it was time for them to go, Elizabeth asked Sarah to give each family an envelope containing personal notes she had written and enough money to help with their medical expenses for years to come. As the room emptied of all but her closest companions, Elizabeth felt the tide of her strength ebbing. Alexander helped her lie back down, and Dr. Harrison checked her pulse with gentle professionalism. "Are you in any pain?" he asked. "No," she said honestly. "I'm not in pain. I'm just tired." The afternoon passed in a haze of quiet conversations, gentle music, and the comforting presence of the people who loved her most. Father Michael came to offer last rites, though Elizabeth faced the ritual with serenity rather than fear. Sarah read aloud from some of Elizabeth's favorite poems. Alexander shared stories from their courtship that made everyone laugh through their tears. As evening approached, Elizabeth asked for a few minutes alone with Alexander. When the others had stepped out, she turned to face her husband of 12 years, the love of her life, the man who would now have to carry on without her. "I need you to know," she said, her voice growing weaker but her words clear, "that loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. You made me better than I ever could have been alone. You supported my dreams, shared my burdens, and loved me even when I was difficult or demanding or impossible." Alexander was crying openly now, no longer trying to hide his grief. "Elizabeth, you are the best person I've ever known. You made me want to be worthy of you every single day. You were always worthy," she said firmly. "And you always will be. Promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll love again someday. Not tomorrow, not next year, but someday. You have too much love in your heart to waste it on grief forever." Alexander shook his head. "I can't promise that. I can't even imagine." "Then, promise me you'll stay open to the possibility. Promise me you won't close your heart to the world." After a long pause, he nodded. "I promise. For you, I promise." They held each other then, as the sun began to set outside their window. Elizabeth felt herself growing sleepy, her breathing becoming more and more shallow. But she wasn't afraid. She was surrounded by love. She had said her goodbyes, and she was ready for whatever came next. "Alexander," she whispered as darkness began to gather at the edges of her vision. "I'm here, darling. I'm right here. The invisible threads," she said softly. "Remember the invisible threads. I'll always be connected to you. Always." As the last light faded from the sky, Elizabeth closed her eyes and let herself drift away on a sea of love and peace. She passed quietly in Alexander's arms, surrounded by the scent of roses from Emma's garden and the sound of prayers whispered by those who loved her most. The announcement of her death came at dawn the next morning, and the world stopped to mourn. Millions of people wept for a princess they had never met but who had touched their lives in countless ways. The children at the hospital held a special memorial service, releasing balloons into the sky with messages of love and gratitude. But perhaps the most beautiful tribute came from Alexander himself, who stood before the world 2 days later to deliver a eulogy that brought even the strongest hearts to tears. Elizabeth believed in the power of love to conquer fear, in the strength that comes from serving others, and in the invisible threads that connect all human hearts, he said, his voice steady despite his grief. "She leaves us not in darkness, but in light, the light of her example, her compassion, and her unwavering faith in the goodness of humanity. She may be gone from our sight, but she will never be gone from our hearts. The invisible threads she spoke of will keep us connected to her, and to each other, forever." As he spoke, 10,000 people stood in respectful silence outside the cathedral, united in their grief and their gratitude for a life that had shown them all what it meant to live with purpose, love with abandon, and face even death with grace. Elizabeth's final goodbye had indeed left the world in tears, but they were tears that watered the seeds of hope, compassion, and love that she had planted in countless hearts. And in that way, she would live forever, carried forward by the invisible threads that bound her to everyone whose life she had touched. The princess was gone, but her legacy would endure for generations, proving that true nobility comes not from titles or crowns, but from the courage to love deeply, serve others selflessly, and face life's greatest challenges with dignity and grace.